Now, as Europe faces challenges from populism, extremism, as well as migration issues, understanding these phenomena through a sociological lens is crucial. Now, Dr. Michal Vašečka is a sociologist and associate professor at the Bratislava International School of Liberal Arts and is a leading expert on ethnicity, race, migration, and the rise of populism. With decades of experience working on civil society issues and consulting for international organizations like the World Bank, he's here to provide us insights on the social dynamics shaping the Central and Eastern Europe. Hello, and thanks for being with us on TVV World.
Thank you for the invitation.
So let's start by touching on the migration topic, as the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk's recent announcement of his migration strategy has drawn a lot of ire as well as support. There's been a heated debate on, well, whether or not it is kind of overdoing it or it encroaches on human rights. What's your take on it?
Well, migration obviously became one of the most polarizing issues for the European Union and very much for the Central European region. Since 2015, we have been exposed to a situation when some governments, and we saw especially Hungarian government and Slovak government, to a certain extent Czech and Polish, opposing the potential deal within the European Union about how to solve the situation. Slowly but systematically, we reached the point when especially Central European countries became obstacle for reaching certain consensus. Now, I would say they were heard of in a sense that certain arrangements were somehow impossible. The redistribution of asylum seekers were absolutely blocked and rejected by these governments. But suddenly we reached the point when, in the light of losing power in some of Western democracies, such as Netherlands and many others, Italy, suddenly even such suggestions that Mr. Tusk came with are being discussed. I believe that simply, we have to be very careful not to open a Pandora's box, because of course, once we reject the right for asylum, we are entering a new phase of the development since the World War II. Let's remember, the whole asylum procedure was created based on our very negative experiences before the World War II in Europe, when various groups of people didn't have any pretext, legislative pretext to apply for asylum, to run from the country. There are numerous examples. That's why we came with it. Of course, what has to be said is that in 50s, the whole system was prepared just for relatively small groups of people. And to be very honest, and this, and I don't want to be named racist, but at that time, Western Europe was not even thinking about people from other continents, from other cultures. It was very much oriented on people from so-called Eastern Europe, Soviet bloc, which, of course, they wanted to prove also the dominance, moral dominance of Western democracies. So suddenly we are in a new situation. We don't have hundreds, eventually thousands of applicants, but millions, hundreds of thousands. Suddenly, people from various parts of the world are coming. And even technically, it's very difficult to continue with the whole procedure. But to open it now is a Pandora's box, because there are far too many enemies of the whole system, and it can be removed completely. And we don't want that. So what Mr. Tusk is coming, in fact, is going far beyond what Warsaw, Bratislava, Prague or Budapest were there even to think about in the past. So I would be very careful here. I still believe there are technical arrangements that might be applied before we will take such a dramatic step.
Right, like you mentioned, this might open the Pandora's box and shape the European discourse going forward. There's going to be a lot more polarization, a lot of things that people perhaps cannot agree on. Now, one of the things that you also mentioned that I find perhaps resonate with is the fact that Poland has opened the door for millions upon millions of Ukrainian refugees, but seeing a problem with perhaps asylum seekers from elsewhere, and you're alluding to the fact that perhaps this system was built back in then when other continents hasn't been considered yet. Do you think there's a little bit of a remnant of that kind of factor into this situation we're seeing right now?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sound like accusing Poland of anything, because exactly as you said, Poland accepted so many refugees from Ukraine that, it's unheard of. I mean, no other country in Europe was so helpful toward refugees from Ukraine. And at the same time, those who would disagree with me now, of course, they might be right in a sense that we were never even thinking before that there might be a situation when some country, I would even call such a country a rock state, in this case Belarus, is pushing migrants into the border, basically utilizing them as as hostages of the situation, and therefore creating an internal problem for other country. In this sense, every government, no matter whether it's a Morawiecki government or Tusk government, would be very careful, how to handle the situation. But still, there is one important thing: those people are hostages of the situation. What I liked about previous arrangements of a Polish government was simply negotiation with China. Because suddenly when Poland said that simply, look, if this will continue and you will not make some type of pressure on Belarus, there will be a problem with the business and trains going from China to Western Europe. And suddenly, the migration dropped down. So obviously, these rock states, these problematic states that are utilizing, let's say, migration and all these fears of people, they are really pouring oil into the fire, should be stopped by diplomacy, etc., etc. Again, I would be very careful to opening a Pandora's box by stopping a chance for applying for asylum. That's going too far, simply.
All right, so like you mentioned, there's perhaps some more creative ways and mechanisms around this that still could be explored.
And again, I'm saying something very positive about Poland now. The Polish diplomacy with China was actually very helpful and very straightforward. And suddenly both China and Poland were on the same page, and Belarus had to withdraw at least to a certain extent.
That's very interesting, and hopefully we can find more creative solutions around these kind of humanistic issues as well. So we do know that you talked a lot about work on issues of ethnicity, race, but as well as societal issues and the backsliding of a rule of law. And you've also discussed a lot about the situation in Slovakia and the rise of what some call the populist movement. Can you help us understand what are the primary drives behind this growing popularity of populist movements, and perhaps relate that to the situation in Slovakia?
Well, that's a long story, so the question is how to make long story short. Mr. Fico returned in 2023 after not being in power for 3 years. Let me remind you and all viewers that, in fact, previously he was in power for a long 12 years. And his main reason why Slovakia was slowly but systematically backsliding from previous positions, not only in terms of quality of democracy, quality of democratic institutions, but also economically. Simply country that, let's say, 20 years ago, after dramatic economic reforms, was really this small tiger of Central Europe, definitely better off than Poland. Now is definitely not better than Poland in any aspect of the world, and it's really slowly backsliding. The major problem was that Mr. Fico, basically, together with oligarchs that Poland doesn't have in such a style as Slovakia, simply overwhelmed, so to say, occupied the whole space, and he was running the country basically against the will of its people. To make a long story short, people at certain moment 6-7 years ago realized that they are living in a kidnapped state, which is basically operating for the sake of those oligarchs, but not for them. There was almost a revolt, I would say, especially after shooting of one investigative journalist who he was killed precisely because of his very good work investigating this type of mafia state, how it was functioning. And for 3 years, very inconsistent, problematic government came to power, which unfortunately didn't have much time to repair things, also because of pandemic, the beginning of a war in Ukraine, and Mr. Fico returned. But this time, he returned basically to make sure that he will stay in power for a long time, or as autocrats are saying, forever. And immediately he started to prepare kind of a autocratic attempt, I would call it, or even autocratic breakthrough with a speed which is unprecedented. Basically, what Viktor Orban was doing in Hungary for years, Fico made in few months. So Slovakia at the moment is in a situation where opposition, civil society, and independent media are fighting back. In some cases, they are fighting back successfully. But the truth is that the most important democratic institutions, police, general prosecutor office, also judges, I mean the courts, and also Supreme Court, Constitutional Court, are still day by day more in the hands of Mr. Fico. So very soon Slovakia might be in a situation when eventually reverse these trends will be deeply problematic, and in the same way as in Poland, it might require certain undemocratic steps, because this is the problem in Poland these days. How to return to legal state, to rule of law relatively quickly, but without breaking the law. Yeah, Slovakia might have the same problems sometimes in the future, and the general mood in a society is rather negative. There is this negative mood. People don't know what to do, and everything is, so to say, fueled by general collapse of certain services. So I would say Slovakia found itself at the moment in a pretty unfortunate situation.
Right, a dire situation indeed. We have very little time, but let's end on a more positive note. Or do you have any strategies in mind, or at least something that could be slightly more effective in addressing the rise of these far-right movements and fostering more social cohesion?
Well, social cohesion is the main story, and since we are in a liberal-oriented conference, I would say that the major problem here, as I see it, is that liberal political forces, and by the way, there is a progressive liberal political party in Slovakia, which is at the moment supported by roughly 24% of population in Slovakia. So, it's not, when I'm saying that there is a very negative mood, it doesn't mean that liberal forces don't have a chance, eventually in the future. But what liberals are making a big mistake in my understanding is that very often they are not offering positive emotions. They are simply offering certain very good arrangement in which people can live and prosper. Liberal arrangements tend to be very good for prosperous societies. There is no question about that. But liberals are not offering stories. Let's look at Donald Trump. Let's look at even Mr. Kaczynski in the past. Let's look at Mr. Fico, Mr. Orban. These people are offering stories and basically saying that you people, you want to be part of this story. And basically liberals should change it, to offer not only positive, rational arrangement, but also something that people can buy into. Yeah.
Perhaps that aspiration is something that we all need. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you. And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. But for more news, update, commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.